Hi, welcome back to session 31 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. In this session, we're going to structure our views so that we can apply this to the home view. And it's going to have a content after all the work that we have done so far, but also we're going to transition to a full screen view, which is going to be a new file on its own. And for that to happen, you'll need to pass the namespace and synchronize between all of these views. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is to create components out of these two views. So let's start with the course item. Right-click on the components folder, new file. We're going to name course item, create, and then we're going to go back to match view, and everything that is inside the first curly braces for the show, we're going to select all of that before the else, then cut that, then replace the text inside the course item. Now for each of the new component, we will need the same states and namespace. So we're going to set at namespace var namespace, then the state var show is equal to false by default. If you've done this properly, then it's going to work just fine. It's going to have all of that UI in its own file. Now the thing is, because we want to synchronize the namespace as well as the state between those views, we're going to do something like what we did with the binding. If you remember, we needed to change the state to a binding, and we can't have a default anymore, so it's going to be of type Boolean, and then we need to set the preview. So show, it's going to be a constant that is true by default. Now for the namespace, that's where it's a little bit different. Instead of setting at namespace, it's just going to be var of type namespace dot id. As a result, this is going to be required and it's going to be passed to the course item when we reference the course item. And also we need to take care of the preview. We're just going to declare a static namespace. It's going to be at namespace static var namespace to be used only for the preview. And just like the constant, it's really not meant to change. So we're going to set the required namespace to namespace that we just declared right here. Now if you resume this should work properly, and we're going to apply exactly the same steps for the detail view. So right-click Views, New File, and it's going to be Course View. Then I'm going to go back to Match View, cut all the scroll view, so everything inside the else statement, go back to Course View, replace the text, and then set my namespace and state. So var namespace of type namespace.id, then at binding var show of type Boolean. Then we're going to fix the preview to have some default values. Let's start with a namespace, static var namespace, then set the required fields, namespace, namespace, and binding is going to be a constant that is going to be true by default. Perfect. We're going to go to home view, and this is where we're going to apply all of that transition in the UI that we have done so far. So first, we're going to need the parent namespace and state. So just the way we did for match view, namespace and state, we can copy the same, go back to home view, and just set that namespace and state. Then using this, we're going to synchronize to the two views that we just referenced. Now we just need to set the structure properly. For the course item, which is the main card, I'm going to replace the fake clear frame of 1000. So I'm going to reference course item, parentheses, then I'm going to bind to my namespace, then show $, show. As a result, you see my course item card right here. And I'm going to put the full screen view to be above the scroll view. So right after overlay, it's going to be course view, parentheses, namespace, $show. Then I have my full view. Next, I just need to set my show statement so that it only shows when I activate it. So for the course item, it's going to be if exclamation point show. So if not show, then I'm going to put the course item. For the detail view, if show, then I'm going to put the course view. Finally, I'm going to need the untap gesture, which I can take from the match view. So let's just cut untap gesture from here to the home view and put that on the course item so that the event is activated when I tap on the card. Let me just play this, and I tap on the card, and voila, I have my beautiful transition that works on my main UI, which is the home view. Isn't that awesome? I was able to set 3 separate files, including the main view, which is now the home view, and then 2 components. We have the detail screen, which is the course view, and the course item, which is the card. And with this setup, I'm going to be able to later on have multiple cards that transition to the detail screen. But first, we're going to need to set the close button for the detail screen. So we're going to head to the course view, and then we're going to put the scroll view inside a Z-stack. Then we're going to cut everything inside the scroll view. So the parentheses plus the V-stack, and we're going to create its own code section. So var cover of type SumView, curly braces, and paste all of that V-stack that we have. Now let's reference cover, and then we're going to create our custom button, which is going to be on top of a scroll view. So button, curly braces. First is going to be our animation. So with animation dot spring 0.6, 0.8, we can remove the blend duration, and curly braces, we're going to set show.toggle. For the button, we're going to add a label, so the content itself, and it's going to be an image, which is using the SF symbol, so system image X mark. Once you have that, you should see this little X. Then we're going to make it bold, so font.body.weight to bold. We're going to change the color, so foreground color to dot secondary. Add a bit of padding of 8. Then we're going to add a background material using background dot ultra thin. It's going to be inside a circle shape. Now for the button placement, we want to put this at the far top right. As a result, we're going to need to set a frame using max width infinity, max height infinity. Then we're going to set alignment to top trailing. Let's just add some negative spacing using padding. So padding of 20 on all sides. Next, we want to make this screen to ignore the safe area. So for both the button, we're going to set ignore safe area, and also the scroll view, ignore safe area. At the same time, the background right now is transparent because the scroll view does not have a background. So we're going to set a background color, and we're going to use the preset color from the assets that is called background. Great, you can see that we have the close button right here, which is going to toggle the show that is bound to the home view state, and it's going to synchronize our animation. Let's go back to home view. Then we're going to test this, and there you go. Just keep in mind that the end animation when you close does not work properly in the preview, and you're going to have to test that in the simulator. But before we do that, we might as well just add the missing title in between the cards here. So we're going to set the text courses set it to uppercase, dot font, footnote, weight is going to be semi-bold, foreground color, secondary. Let's align it to the left side, so frame, max width, infinity, alignment to leading, and let's add some padding as well, but the padding is just going to be horizontal of 20. Beautiful. Now it's all aligned properly for the cards, the titles, and it's super clean. Before building this in the iOS simulator, we're going to need to change back in the app file to content view. And now we can build this, and there you go. We have a beautiful custom transition that works perfectly in the home view UI, and that works great in dark mode as well. And we learned some really interesting techniques such as the background blur and how to transition individual elements using match geometry effect. Of course, we still have a bunch of issues, and we can take even further by hiding the status bar, for example, and also setting some of these transition to have a delay. So for example, if we have a new item that is not part of match geometry, then we can set it to appear after a delay. So we're going to learn all of those things in the next session. I'll see you then. Welcome back to session 32 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. Today we're going to learn how to show and hide the status bar in the detail view so that the two don't overlap with the close button. And also, since the close button is inside another view, we're going to need to synchronize between those two views by using the unchanged modifier. Back in Xcode, we're going to declare a new state called var show status bar, and we're going to set it to true by default. Then we're going to go ahead and apply the modifier, and this can be done anywhere, but in this case we're going to set it to the Z stack. Then let's type dot status bar, and here we have the option to set to hidden or not. So we're going to select that. This is accepting the boolean, which is the state that we just declared. So show status bar. The boolean that we have is set to true, and that would mean that the status bar is hidden, which is the opposite of the actual boolean. To solve this, we're going to add exclamation point in front, which gives the opposite. So instead of true, it's going to be false. Then let's go to the untap gesture for when we tap the card. And here we're going to change that boolean. Show status bar is equal to false. Let's test in the iOS simulator. When I tap on the card, the status bar disappears, but when I close the button, it doesn't come back. And that's because I haven't set show status bar to be back to true. One detail that you should know is that when you use with animation and you change the boolean of the show status bar, it's going to set the transition. So in our case, we already have this in place, and it does a little bit of a fade in using the animation timing that we have here. Next, we're going to deal with the close button so that it shows the status bar again. What we have in place so far is that the course view is bound by using a binding that is called show. And this allows it so that when you press on the close button, it's going to dismiss the card. And back to home view, you're going to see that this is bound to the show state. And therefore, we can listen to the changes made to the show state by using the unchanged modifier. So let's go to the Z stack again. And right after the status bar, we're going to set dot unchange of show. And then for perform, we're going to press enter. We have the new value that we receive. And then we can set if new value is equal to true, so curly braces, we're going to set show status bar to false. In other words, when we show the card, then the status bar is going to be hidden. Otherwise, else, curly braces, show status bar is equal to true. Let's build this, and again, it has a transition, it hides the status bar, but when we come back, there's no transition, and that's because we haven't set the with animation. We're going to go back to Xcode, and we're going to wrap the entire thing. So right before if, we're going to set with animation, enter, and we're going to put the if statement inside the with animation. And now we have that transition back and forth. Now we might want to use the same animation timing with Spring like what we have in the open card. So we would copy and paste the parentheses after with animation, and we're going to apply here. Now a better technique is to create some preset animations so that we don't have to rewrite these Spring animation values every single time. And we have at 3 places, such as for the course view as well. When we press on the close button, it also calls the Spring animation timing. As a result, we're going to create a new file in styles, and we're going to call that, using a swiftUI view, animations, and then create. In this file, we're going to delete everything except import swiftUI, and then we're going to use an extension to animation, curly braces, and then now we can set the preset animations. Let's type static, let open card, which is the name of the animation timing, is equal to animation dot spring, and then we can set the response as well as the damping fraction. So let's set 0.5, 0.7, and we can remove the blend duration. We can copy this for the close animation. Instead of open card, it's going to be close card. Animation, the spring response is going to be 0.6, and then damping 0.9. Now we're going to go back to home view, and this is where we can use the animation presets. So inside the parentheses of with animation, we can replace dot spring with the parentheses and set dot close card in this case for the unchanged modifier, because that's where we tap on the close button. And then when we tap on the course item, so the card itself, it's going to open the card. And so dot spring, it's going to be open card. And then for the course view, we can also set on the button, it's going to be dot close card. Awesome. While we're here and to prepare for the next section, we're going to make our code a little bit cleaner here. So we're going to move the button inside its own code section. We're going to name that button. And right at the bottom, we're going to set var button of type SumView, curly braces, and then paste the content of the button itself. And now we have a cleaner body. And that's it. So if we tap the course item, it's going to hide using the transitions with the animation presets that we have set. And so in the next section, I'm going to show you how to optimize the animation so that some of the elements that are not shared across the 2 views are going to be using chaining animation. And also we're going to add a little bit of content here to create a more real scenario. And so I look forward to show you that next. See you in the next section. Hi, and welcome back to session 33 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. In this session, we're going to learn how to optimize our animation. So if you look at this animation, especially when it goes fast, you see some of the problems, but it's kind of hard to see. So one trick to help with that is to go to debug and then click on slow animations. And when you tap on the card, you're going to see right away that we have a problem with some elements that are not shared between the screens. But also when you close, you see that it disappears right away. And then it transitions with a fade in to finally resume the animation after the fade in. So what we're going to learn today is how to deal with the Z index and then customize the transition, and also how to chain the animation so that we make these non-shared elements to appear a little bit later with a fade. Back in Xcode, we're going to scroll a little bit from the home view, and we're going to go to where it says show course view, and this is when we have the second screen showing on top and then dismissing from the top. We need to make sure to use Z index to 1, which is going to be higher than the default 0. And therefore, when you dismiss the screen, you can see that it does not instantly disappear anymore. Secondly, we're going to customize the transition as well, because the fade is a little bit too slow. And if you want to customize the transition when you're using an if statement, you can do so on the first component right after the curly braces, and we're going to set transition. Then we'll customize dot opacity, which is the fade transition, then animation, and here we can set one of the preset animation, including ease in out, and then we're going to set the duration to 0.1. So the fade is going to be much faster, especially at the beginning and at the end. But we also want to have a different transition at the beginning and at the end, so we can set different timing on either side. To customize that, I'm going to cut everything inside the parentheses because I'm going to use that later on. And here I'm going to change that to asymmetric. And here we have insertion and removal. So you might guess it, insertion is at the beginning and removal is at the end to the beginning. And so any transition is going to be replaced by the opacity animation with the duration that we set earlier. And we can do so at the removal as well. And we can change the duration to 0.3. And we can even add a delay of 0.2. Now we can take a look, and when we open, you can see that we have as little as possible of that fade in of the unshared element, especially when we end the animation. You can see that it's not doing fade in here, but at the very end, the bottom screen is showing using fade, and I think that's much nicer than before. Now let's talk about chaining animation, because we have these unshared elements that comes a little bit later on the second screen, and you can see that it's kind of floating, not really transitioning well. So we're going to go to Xcode and we're going to jump to course view. Then we're going to use the unappear modifier. But first we're going to set the state. So at state var appear is equal to an array of booleans. And this is expressed with the square brackets. And we're going to set the default of false 3 times using the comma in between. So instead of setting 3 states, we can just set 1 and we can have an array of multiple booleans. I think that's quite useful. Next, we're going to set unappear to the Z stack and perform, just press enter. And then we're going to change the appear array using the index value expressed with the square brackets. So 0 means the first value is equal to true. And then we can do the same for the other ones as well. Copy and paste 2 times, and I'm just going to change the index value. Now we're going to scroll down a little bit to find the content that are not shared, and that includes the divider as well as the H stack. So we're going to apply a modifier called opacity, and we're going to use the state. So appear using the index value of 0, question mark. If yes, then set to 1, otherwise set to 0. Let's also do the same for the H stack, which is the text with the author. And we're going to set appear index value to 1. Great. Now let's deal with the animation timing. So when you do a chain animation, you want to make sure that some of these elements, they don't necessarily fade in at the same time. So we're going to wrap each one of them with animation. And we're going to put the first one inside, and then we're going to change the timing. So parentheses, let's say ease out, and we're going to use a delay of 0.3, and we're going to copy with animation for the other 2, then put the state change inside like this. So now we have one that has a delay of 0.3, the second one 0.4, and the third one 0.5. Thanks to that chain animation, you're going to see that at first it does not show, and then it's going to show the divider first and then fade in the second one, which is the author. The transition that we had was only for the animation in, not the animation out, so you can see that it's not doing that. To do the dismiss animation, we're going to set on change of show and then perform enter. Then we're going to make it instantly disappear. So appear index value 0 is equal to false, and we can just copy for the other 2, then 1, and then 2. As a result, when we dismiss, it just instantly disappears. Of course, you have the option to set the chain animation to disappear as well, but sometimes it's not really necessary, especially when you don't slow the animation. You're going to see that it barely seems like it's disappearing, but it's super smooth. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to add some content underneath to serve as the third part of the chain animation. So it's going to have the text, the title, and more text. Let me just scroll down, and right after cover, I'm going to declare another one called content. So var content of type SumView. And then I'm going to paste the content. And this is very generic. It's just a VStack with a bunch of text that you can copy and paste from the Figma file. Or you can also go to the content area and you can copy and paste the entire code section right here. And once you have this content, we are going to reference that right after cover. Now you're going to see that when you resume, the text is a little bit overlapping with the floating description. So we're going to need to use offset using Y of 120, and we're going to set a padding as well using bottom of 200. Finally, we can apply the opacity animation. So using opacity modifier up here and then square brackets 2 for the third index value, question mark 1, otherwise 0. Awesome. Now to keep things clean, I like to make sure that we're not putting everything in the body. So I'm going to create a function called fade in, and I'm going to cut all of that content, call the function from here, fade in, and then create the function. So func fade in, parentheses, curly braces, paste that. And for the fade out, let's do the same. So func fade out, parentheses, curly braces, and then paste that. So fade out right here. What is cool about code sections is that you can navigate from the breadcrumbs. You can see that I have my function right after the body and then the cover content button. You can also decide to put the function at the very end so that it doesn't mix too much with the UI. And I'm just going to put that right after button. And going back to the breadcrumbs, you can see that they're right after the button, and I can navigate quite easily back to the body. So I hope you found this useful. In the next one, we're going to learn how to work with data. So far, we've used match geometry effect with a single card, and we don't have any dynamic data. It's definitely a lot more complex, so it's going to be a big one, but I think the techniques that we're going to use are going to be really useful to you. So I'll see you in the next one. Hi, and welcome back to session 34 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. So far, the course item here is hard-coded, and it's using a single item. We don't have multiple cards, and it's not using a loop with dynamic data. If you look at the home view, you're going to see that we're referencing the course item, and the course item itself, it's all hard-coded. And so we're going to need to use the data from the data model and the sample data using loop. And this definitely makes things a little bit more complicated, but thankfully I'm going to be able to help you through this process. First, we're going to go to the course data model, and we're going to prepare for the new set of data. Now for the course data model, we're missing the background. And so we're going to add that right after image. So var background, and it's going to be of type string. As a result, we're going to need to update the sample data. Let's just replace that using the fix that we have here. And we just need to respect the order, which is right after image. The first is going to be background 5. And here you just need to replace them one by one. But to save time, we're going to copy and paste from the content. And also we're going to change the name from courses to featured courses so that we have a new set of data called courses and to differentiate between the two. So let's rename this to featured courses, and I can just copy and paste from my content like this. And then I'm going to create a new one called courses, And again, I'm going to copy and paste from the content as well. So featured courses is for the top cards, and courses is for the list of cards underneath where we're using a match geometry effect. Let's go back to home view, and this is where we're going to browse to the featured. And right now featured is using the array called courses, and we rename that to featured courses. And then we're going to go back to body, and for the course item, which is the list of items at the bottom, we're going to command click on it, repeat. Inside the parentheses, we're going to use courses with course in. Now, before we move to fix that, we're going to need to replace each of the course item with actual data. So we're going to command click on this one, jump to definition, and then we're going to declare the variable. So var course of type course is equal to courses using the first index, so 0. And then we're going to change the content. Course title. Here it's going to be course.subtitle. And here course.text. Instead of illustration, it's going to be course.image. And for the background, course.background. Now going back to the top, I like to put the variables before the binding, but that's a matter of preference. And later on, you want to organize the different type of variables, such as binding, app storage, variables, etc. So let's go back to home, and where we're referencing the course item, it's definitely going to need fixing. So we know that after namespace, we're going to set the course, and the course is going to take it from the receiving item, which is course, and then comma. Now this is looking great. We just need to fix the match geometry effect IDs. So let's go back to course item, and where it says match geometry effect. And by the way, one cool trick in Xcode is when you select a keyword, it's going to highlight similar items. So in this case, I can see that this is where I need to change all my IDs. So I'm going to set title, and then I'm going to insert the course.id by using the backward slash and parentheses. And I'm going to do the same with the other ones, such as subtitle. So course.id. And text, I can just copy and paste the same backward slash course ID pretty much everywhere. It's going to save times. The same with blur, image, background, and mask. It's very important that each of these match geometry effect that they have a unique ID, otherwise they will all overlap in the same space. Now let's go back to home, and you're going to see that we're going to have all the items inside the loop, but when we tap on it, it's all going to the same course view. And that's because we haven't set the course view to have dynamic items. So let's scroll down a little bit where we set the show and then course view. And then we're going to do the same. So command click on it, repeat. It's going to be courses. And instead of item, course in. Then we're going to jump to the course view and repeat the same steps. So right after namespace, var course of type course, and set the default to courses, square brackets, 0. Now let's change the data. So we're going to go to illustration. It's going to be course.image. At the same time, we're going to take care of the match geometry effect. So course.id, where I'm just going to copy this portion and paste it everywhere. Let's do all at the same time. Now this is going to be course.background and background with the ID. The same with the mask with the ID. Then the text, which is going to be the title. So course.title and the ID, course.subtitle, and then the ID, course.text, and then the ID. And let's just highlight a match geometry effect to make sure that we're not missing any. So here we're missing the one for the blur. And let's highlight again. I think that's pretty much it. and you can just scan really quickly thanks to the highlighted word. Finally, we're going to go back to home view, and then where it says course view, we're going to add the course using the course that we're receiving, and then comma. Finally, going back to the preview, you're going to see that everything should be working, except that you're going to notice it's always the same data yet again, but slightly differently. Now it's always the last card. And that's because we haven't set the selected card, which is exactly what we're going to learn in the next session. So I'll see you then. Hello and welcome back. This is session 35 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. And today we're going to fix two major problems. Since we started to use data, now we have the loop of the course items. It's now going to the same last item of the loop. And also we have a bit of a problem with going back to the beginning position of the screen. And so today we're going to learn how to fix that. Now going back to home view, we're going to set a state in which we store the selected ID. So var selected ID is equal to UUID because that's the type of ID that we have set for our data model. And UUID parentheses is what's generating a default value for the selected ID. Now that we have this in place, we can go down a little bit to find the if show statement where we're calling the course view. Now you can see here we do have a loop, and what this means is that it's showing every single course view at the same time, which is why it's showing the last item of that loop to be on top of everything else before. So what we need to do instead is to set an if statement inside the for each loop to say if course.id, which is what we're receiving, is equal to the selected ID, then show the course view. Otherwise, don't show anything, which means that it's only going to show the course view that has been selected. Next, we're going to scroll back up a little bit where it says course item, and we're going to focus on the untap gesture. And this is where we're going to make sure that when we tap on a card, it's going to set the selected ID. So selected ID is equal to course.id, which is of type UUID. Once we build the app, you're going to see that when I tap on the first card, and boom, we show the selected card. And that's just beautiful. We're going to click on the next one just to make sure that it works. And yes, it does. And the last one, it shows the right content. The next problem is just to make sure that it doesn't go back to the top of the screen. So we're going to find a fix for that. Let me try to explain the next problem. When we're showing the list of cards here, we're only showing it when we're not tapping on the cards. As a result, when we tap on a card, this completely disappears and there's just no space. So what we need to do is to create an else statement in which when we're tapping on a card, then we will have some default cards. And we're going to do that using a rectangle instead. And so this rectangle is going to replace the course item when we're tapping on the cards, and it's going to use the same physical space. So we're going to set a fill, and the fill is going to be white. The frame is going to have a height of 300. Then let's set the corner radius to 30. Also set a shadow. The shadow is going to use color parentheses shadow, radius 20, 0, 10. Then I'm also going to set opacity 0.3 so that it works on both light mode and dark mode. Then we're going to set the same padding using horizontal of 30 on each side. Then we're going to loop the rectangle the same way as the course item. So let's repeat and use courses, then course in. As a result, if you test the app, you're going to see that when I go to the course view and I dismiss, it keeps the context of space. And that's really nice. And that is thanks to the placeholder while the selected card is showing. So before we finish, we're going to organize into code sections so that it's easier to read. First of all, we're going to have the cards here. So let's name this cards, and we're going to create after featured, and then we're going to declare cards of type some view, then paste the content. We're going to do the same for the detail view. So this for each here. Now, the reason why I'm including the for each is because it's really important to get context of the value that we receive, which is the course, and it has all fit in that code section. So again, let's cut the entire for each. We're going to name this one detail. Then let's jump to cards, go after that, then declare var detail, some view, then paste the for each. Awesome. In the next session, I want to show you how to deal with environment objects because we don't want to use app storage. We don't want the state to be persistent. So in that case, you want to use environment object in order to show and hide the tab bar, which is in a completely different view. So in that case, environment objects are going to make sense. So I hope to see you in the next session. Welcome to session 36 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. Today we're going to cover environment objects, and it's going to use combine. So the reason why we're doing that is because we want to be able to hide the tab bar when we press on these cards and then show it back again. Just like app storage, we don't want to use the binding between the child and the parent container. But at the same time, we don't want this state to be persistent. So while app storage can handle very simple states, combine can actually handle a lot more stuff, such as asynchronous events and data. And typically you want to use this when you want to synchronize the data across the entire app, and it's really powerful. First of all, we're going to declare those states in one place. So we're going to right click on model and new file. We're going to use swiftUI view and then model as the name of the file, then create. This is where we're going to delete the content and also import combine. Now we want to publish a set of values that we can use anywhere in the app. First of all, we're going to declare the class model. It's going to be of type observable object, curly braces, and then we're going to publish whatever values that we want, such as var show detail is going to be of type Boolean, and the default value is going to be false. Now, why show detail? Well, if you remember, we set a show which is bound to the course view, and this allows us to say if the card is open or not. The thing is, we want to have that data available anywhere in the app, not just between the course view and the home view. But we don't necessarily want to replace it because then we need to undo the binding that we have learned, which I think is still quite useful. So what we're going to do instead is to use that show detail value to be synchronized with the show state. Now, in order to use that value, we're going to need to go to the design code app file, and then we're going to declare a new value called a state object. Then variable model is equal to model parentheses. Model here is the data that we just created. And the state object here ensures that we're not going to call this data multiple times across the lifetime of the app. And that can be dangerous when you're loading data from an API and you don't want to call that API multiple times, which is going to affect the performance. Now we need to make sure that this data is available across the app. Therefore, we're going to add it to the content view, which is the root of the entire app. So we're going to declare environment object, and we're going to use the model that we just declared. So every time that I want to use the values, I'm going to have to set an environment object. So let's head to home view. We're going to go to the top, and then we're going to declare environment object, variable model of type model. As a result, I now have access to whatever values that I have in my model file. In this case, we have access to show detail. In order to synchronize with the show state, we're gonna go to the cards section, and where we have the untap gesture, as we toggle the show state, we're going to do model.showDetail.toggle. So now it's synchronized. When we tap on the card, it's also going to toggle the show detail. It is important to note that since we're using environment objects, we also need to deal with the preview. Just the same way with the binding, we have to make sure that the preview has the same values so that it can function properly. So we're gonna go to home view previews, and we're going to add environment object, which is going to initialize model parentheses. If you don't do this, by the way, and let's say I comment on environment object, and whatever action that changes the show detail, for example, it's going to say preview crashed. So it is important to make sure that your preview is also going to include the environment object that you're using. Next, we're going to use that state change for the show detail to be able to hide and show the tab bar. And that is being controlled in content view. So right after app storage, we're going to declare again environment object, variable model of type model. Then let's not forget the content view here for the preview. And because it's a group, we can essentially apply to the group instead of for each of these content views. So right after group, environment object, and initialize the model. Back to the top, we're going to apply that state change to the tab bar by using offset. The offset is going to use the Y position using the model.showDetail $200. So we're going to hide it by pushing it down 200 points. Otherwise, set it to 0, which means unchanged. Now, if you build the app, you're going to see that when I tap on the card, it does hide the tab bar. But when I close, it doesn't come back. And that's because we haven't toggled the show detail on the close button. The last step is to go to the course view where we have the close button. So the button right here, we're going to jump to definition. And then on the action inside the parentheses, we have with animation where the show is being toggled. We're also going to add show detail. But first, we need to declare that at the very top. So it's going to be environment object var model of type model. Then we're going to go back to button, and right next to show.toggle, we're going to set a model.showDetail.toggle. And let's not forget to go to the preview. In the preview, next to course view, we're going to set environment object and initialize the model from here. And that's it. You're able to hide the tab bar when you open the card, and when you dismiss the card, then the tab bar comes back again. Now, as I mentioned previously, I much prefer the simplicity of app storage versus binding or environment object, just because we have to set that environment object on every single view and the previews. But the thing that is important to understand is that environment object is not persistent, and it's also a lot more powerful, which means that you can have much richer data that you can synchronize across the app. So in the next session, I want to show you how to set a scroll parallax in the course view, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll see you in the next session. Hello, and welcome back to session 37 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. For a lot of detail screen like this, when you scroll up, you're going to see this blank space here that typically you can use for pull to refresh, But if you want to make it a little bit more interesting, you can use a nice parallax effect like this one. So you can scroll and then you can blur the background. You have multiple elements, the front, the middle, as well as the background that you can move at different speed, and that's what we call a parallax effect. Back to Xcode, we're going to go to the course view file, and this is where we're going to organize the content. So we're going to jump to the breadcrumb, and I'm going to find the cover. And so this is where I have a bunch of layers. So for example, the image itself, which is this one, the background, as well as the mask. So this is what masks the entire thing. And then you have the foreground, which is this container right here with the title and the text. And you can see that we have a lot of these sub-elements that we don't really need, so we can definitely organize this in its own section so that it's easier to find ourselves. So I'm going to select the entire thing, cut it, and then I'm going to call it overlay content. So at the very end, right after, let's say, button, and before the fade in, I'm going to set var overlay content of type SumView, then paste that content. Like this, we don't need to pay attention to the inner elements of the entire content. So we're gonna scroll back up to cover, and here you can see that it's a lot easier to manage the parallax because we have roughly these three elements such as the image, the background, as well as the foreground content. Next, as we've learned before, in order to detect the scroll position, we're going to need Geometry Reader. So we're going to embed the VStack, command click on it, and then embed. It's going to be called Geometry Reader. Then proxy in, and we can fix the indentation right here. So Geometry Reader sometimes needs to know the size of the content, and if we don't set that, you can see that it's not taking the size properly, which is why we have the content that is overlapping with the cover. So for Geometry Reader, we're going to set a frame, set a height of 500. Next, in order to get the Y position while scrolling, we're going to declare let scroll Y is equal to proxy. So this is the value that we're getting, dot frame in global, and we're going to get dot min Y. So we're declaring this because we're going to use this value multiple times. Otherwise, if you're only using it once, you can just use this longer value directly. Now for the parallax, if you don't want the element to move, you need to cancel the scroll position. So right now everything is moving at the same speed. So what we can do is to go to the background, and we're going to use the Y position, then the scroll Y, but we're going to put minus in front so that we subtract the Y position itself. As a result, when you scroll, you can see that the background is not moving at all. And likewise, we can apply this to the mask so that the entire thing is not going to move, including the mask. Already, you can see that we have a pretty interesting effect. What about elements that move at different speed, such as the image and the foreground content? Well, what we can do is to set again the offset and the Y position, scroll Y, and we're going to use multiply by minus 0.8. So if you want to make it slower than the actual scroll, you use minus, but if you want to make it faster, you use a positive number. And in this case, we're going to use minus. Then we can definitely play with the speed. So for example, if we want to make the overlay content faster, I'm just going to copy and paste to the overlay content, and I'm going to set this to 0.6. Now you can see that the image itself is moving slower than the foreground content. With just a few offset modifiers, we have 4 different speed. We have the background that is not moving, we have the image that is moving the slowest, the overlay content in the middle, and then the content itself that is moving at normal speed. But the thing is, we can play with other modifiers than offset. For example, we can use the height. Now we're going to go to the frame that has a height of 500, and we're going to add, so using a plus sign, the scroll Y. And with just that, you can see that the whole canvas for the cover is expanding, and also it's making the image try to fill the entire space. Therefore, it creates a really cool scale effect at the same time. Now we can play with other effects such as scale and blur. So if you want to make the scale effect more pronounced, we can use dot scale effect, and we can use scroll Y plus 1. Why plus 1? It's because scale always starts with a scale of 1, and the scroll Y starts with 0. So at the beginning, it's going to look like this. It's way too pronounced, and we can definitely divide this by 1000, for example, to make it a little bit less pronounced, but still awesome. Next, a really popular effect is the blur. So we can use dot blur. Using the radius, it's going to be scroll Y. And again, it's going to be a little bit too pronounced, so we can divide this by 10. Then we have a much nicer progression. Finally, you might have noticed that when you scroll up, so above the 0 position, the effect might start to break. And to fix that, we can set a condition when we scroll above the 0 position, we're not going to apply any effect at all. So to do that, we can start with the first scroll Y applied to the height, and we're going to set the condition scroll Y is greater than 0, question mark, then apply the effect. Otherwise, it's really important to know the default value, which in this case is 500. So the first part we can definitely copy because this is the same for all the other values. So next one is for the course image, and then otherwise 0. So for any offset, we can definitely use 0 as a default. Again, for the background image, and then otherwise 0. Let's do the other ones at the same time. For the mask, otherwise 0. Overlay content, otherwise 0. And then what's left is the scale effect. So we're going to paste that in front, otherwise set to 1. For the blur, it's optional. And why? It's because when we have a minus blur radius, it does not apply at all to the blur effect. That's it. Today we learned how to create this beautiful parallax effect where we have multiple speed for different elements, and also we're playing with the scale as well as the blur. In the next session, I want to show you how to use the drag gesture so you can drag or swipe around the elements and then apply some really cool transitions afterwards. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome back to session 38 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. In this session, we're going to learn how to create a drag gesture for the detail screen. And oftentimes you're going to see it used to drag down or to drag from the left with the edge pan gesture to be able to dismiss the screen, because it's much easier to do that when you're using one hand, using your thumb, instead of having to reach the close button every single time. Back in Xcode, in the course view file, we can apply the drag gesture to pretty much any element that you want to be able to drag, and in this case we're going to apply it to the entire canvas. So we can use the scroll view for that, and we're going to apply it before ignore save area, because if you do that after, it can have a problem when it transitions back and forth against the save area. So right after background, I'm going to set dot gesture, and inside the parentheses, drag gesture parentheses. Now drag gesture has a few events that you want to use. First of all, we're going to set the indentation, and right after the parentheses, we're going to set dot unchange. So that's the first event that we're using, and we're not going to use the parentheses, we're just going to use curly braces, and after the curly braces, value in. So this is what we're receiving from the event, and it's important to know what type of value, that you want to play with and how accurate they are for what you need to do. Location is very similar to translation, and I found that translation is more accurate. So this is using a CG size, and that's what we're going to use. But first of all, we're going to store that in a state. So we're going to go to right after environment object, set state var view state of type CG size because we're using the translation, and we're going to set the default of .0. Then this view state, we're going to store it. So view state is equal to value.translation. Now, once we have this updated state that is using the drag gesture in real time, we're going to apply that to one of the modifiers of the scroll view, and it has to be before the gesture. And so we're going to use scale effect, then view state dot width, and width is the equivalent of the X position. And then we have +1 because scale always starts with 1. Otherwise, if the value that we have from the view state is 0, then the scale effect is going to be 0, and we're not going to see anything at the beginning. So as a result, you're going to see that when I drag left and right, because I'm using the width, which is the X position, you can see that it's playing around with the scale effect. Now, if you want to make that less pronounced, you can divide it by 500, and it's going to be a lot slower. And another thing is that we want to set the opposite direction. So we're going to set -500. So when I swipe to the right, it's going to reduce in size instead. Next, when we release the drag, we want to be able to reset the position. So in order to do that, we're going to use another event, and this time it's going to be called .unended. So let's do the same, curly braces, value in. Then we can set the unchanged and unended to be on the same indentation. Now for unended, let's reset the view state is equal to .0. As a result, you're going to see that when I drag and I release, it just goes back to the original position. If you want to have a nice transition, we're going to wrap the state change inside with animation. And we can use one of the preset animations such as close card, or you can of course use easy in, easy out, for example, and set curly braces, then put the state change inside. Now when you drag and you release, it has a nice transition back. Next, we're going to play around with the background effects a little bit. So when I drag here, you can see that I can add a little bit of a dim background and then some drop shadows as well as some corner radius. So let's start with the drop shadow. Right after background, I'm going to set a dot shadow. The color is going to be black, dot opacity at 0.3, radius 30, x 0, y 10. And then we have the scale effect. After the scale effect, we're going to add another background, and that is for the dimming. So thanks to the power of swiftUI, I can just wrap multiple containers to create the effect that I want. So it has to be after scale effect, otherwise it's also going to apply to dim background, and we don't want that. So let's add another background, and this time dot black dot opacity, and we're going to use the view state as a value, again using the width, which is the X position, and we're going to divide that number by 500. So let's try again. It looks like this, and you can see that the more that I go forward, the more it dims the background, which is really neat. And finally, we can also add a background blur. So another background using ultra thin material, and this is going to be very nice when we do this on top of the existing cards from the home view. Next, let's try a very neat trick with the corner radius. Right after background, we're going to add dot mask, and here we're going to use a shape to mask everything, including the background. So let's use rounded rectangle parentheses, corner radius and style. Let's set to 30 for now, and the style is going to be continuous. So when I drag, you can see that it has a corner radius, but here's where it gets interesting. I can animate that corner radius. I can replace the 30 by the view state value dot width. Now when I drag, you can see that it has a nice progression for the corner radius. This is a little bit too abrupt, so we can divide this by 3, and now it's going to feel a lot more natural and smooth. Next, we're going to try to fix when we drag left. We don't want this to scale up because it looks really weird. So we can decide to block the left drag and just to enable the right drag. To do that, we're going to go to the drag gesture where it says unchanged, and right before view state, now we're going to use a guard. And a guard is like an if statement, except that we don't need to indent. So I don't need to do if and then curly braces and then more if inside, and then we have a pyramid of doom. Instead of doing this, I can just say guard value.translation.width is greater than 0. Otherwise, do nothing. So what this means is that we want to make sure that the value is always above 0. And this is the condition for going to the next line. Otherwise, it's just going to stop running the code, and this is not going to be read at all. So again, guard is to make sure that this condition is met so that the next code is read. Otherwise, it stops the code. This is the result of our efforts today. And when I go to this screen here, I can now drag, and it has a nice blur background that has the context of the background cards because we're using the background blur. As we drag right, it scales down. It also animates the rounded corners. It has a drop shadow. It dims the background as well. And when we release, it goes back to the original position, and we cannot drag left more than the 0 position so that we can avoid having this weird scale effect that goes up. So in the next session, I want to show you how to dismiss this view as we drag and how to apply the edge pan gesture so that we cannot drag from this position, but only from the very left position of the screen so that we can avoid conflicts with other buttons and gestures. So I'll see you in the next session. Welcome back. This is session 39 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course. Today we're going to learn how to set the edge pan gesture, which is to allow the gesture only in the left zone of your screen. And also we're going to make sure that when we swipe and release at a certain position, it's going to dismiss the screen and go back to the home screen. To achieve the edge pan gesture, it's actually very simple. We're going to go to the gesture, which is right here on the scroll view. And then we're going to go to unchange, and right before view state and after the guard, we're going to set a condition if value.startLocation is less than 100, then we're going to update the view state. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. As a result, you're going to see that you cannot swipe from here. You can only swipe for the first 100 points of this screen. And this number can definitely be customized. Next, we're going to dismiss the screen once it reaches a certain position and release the drag. So we're going to go to unended, and before with animation, we're going to set if view state dot width is greater than 80 curly braces. Then we're going to change the state that's going to dismiss this view. Let's go to the close button to find that. Select a button. For the action, we can use the same code, so I can just copy and then go back to body. And here I can paste that. So let's build this and take a look. Now you see that when I try to dismiss, but the position is not beyond 80, it's simply going to go back. But if it's beyond that position and I dismiss, it's going to transition back to the home screen. But we need to add a little bit of delay so that the transition is a little bit smoother. So I can just go back here And right after close card, we're going to add delay 0.3. Then you can see that it's going to try to reset first, and then it's going to dismiss. Next, we're going to try to dismiss during the drag. So when we drag and it goes far enough, we don't need to release it. It's going to automatically dismiss the view. And in order to do that, we're going to use exactly the same code as what is happening during unended. So if you look at this code, when we set the condition here, it does the dismiss with delay, but it also resets the card. And we're going to create a function at the very end. So let's select fade out. And right after that, we're going to create func close parentheses curly braces and put all of that code. But here we're only interested in the state change, so we can remove the if condition because that's going to be managed outside of this function. So let's head back to the body, and then we're going to find the unchanged, and right after start location at the very end, we're going to set if view state dot width is greater than 120, then we're going to call the close function. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you start swiping and it does fulfill the condition, you're going to see that it has this issue with the scaling. In order to fix that, we're going to need to wrap the state change for the translation inside with animation. It's going to use the close card preset, and then we're going to put the state change inside. So this should fix our issue. And if we drag too far, then it's just going to reset automatically. Finally, we can fix how we're reusing the code. So here, for this if statement, we're going to call close function. But remember that the close function also includes the resetting. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this reset that's already been called in this function inside an else statement. One issue that I haven't found a perfect fix is sometimes when you drag a little bit in a diagonal way, it's going to hang like this. And it's kind of weird. It's not really breaking, but I found a fix that can minimize that from happening. So we're going to go to drag gesture, and we're going to set minimum distance to 30 and coordinate space to local. So this is not going to be a perfect fix, but it's definitely going to minimize the amount of times that this can happen. So dragging can be complex in many ways, especially when you have a lot of elements that have to work and we're using match geometry effect. And from some contexts, such as a modal, you don't really want to have the drag because it's going to be conflicting with the default drag. And here we have an issue when you keep dragging and it close, it's going to continue the animation for a little bit. So for those situations, you should make it so that the drag is on demand, meaning that we can disable and enable it when we want. So when we close this view, the drag should be disabled from that point. Let's head back to the course view, and we're going to set a new state. Var is draggable is equal to true by default. And then we're going to jump to the close function. When we dismiss that view, let's set is draggable to false. And then we're going to go back to the body where we have the gesture. We're going to set the condition for is draggable. But first of all, it can be really helpful to set the drag gesture in its own section. So let's cut all of this. We're going to name that drag. We're going to create a code section after overlay content. So right before fade in, let's set var drag of type some gesture, curly braces, and paste the drag gesture. As a result, if we go back to the top, to the body, it's going to be a lot cleaner, and also we can set it in one line. And then we can set the condition is draggable, question mark. If true, then enable the drag, otherwise set it to nil. As a result, when I dismiss the view and it closes using the function, at this point, even though I'm still dragging, the drag has been disabled, meaning that it stops the animation. In the next session, we're going to learn a little bit about lazy grid and how to customize some of these cards so that you can have multiple items across columns and rows. At the same time, while we're not going to focus on the iPad, we're going to fix some issues that are easy to learn. So I hope to see you in the next session. Hey there, this is session 40 and the final one of my swiftUI for iOS 15 part 2. Today we're going to learn about lazy grid so that we can turn a layout that is spread vertically like this to be able to spread into columns and rows. Also, we're going to learn how to fix different layout issues so that we can adapt for screens that have different corner radius or no corner radius at all. In Xcode, let's focus on the home view. While we're not going to focus on the iPad, we're still going to learn some key features such as the lazy grid to be able to adapt that to a bigger screen or to make the card smaller and spread vertically or horizontally. So first of all, we're going to change the preview into the iPad mini. Whenever you change the device, it might take a little bit, and it's also useful to be able to show what your Xcode is doing. So for example, if you're running the app across multiple simulators, or if you're indexing while changing the device or while running code, you're going to know what's happening. Sometimes if things hang, you can definitely restart Xcode. Once you have your preview running, we can now make this a little bit smaller, let's say 75%. And we're going to head to the cards and we're going to apply the lazy grid, which is essentially like a V-stack or H-stack, except that it goes both directions. So we're going to embed the whole thing, including the if statement, inside a lazy V-grid. So before the if statement, we're going to set lazy V-grid parentheses, and here it's expecting columns and content. So let's select that. The columns are of type array grid items, and the content we can just press enter. It's going to create the curly braces, and the code, we're going to move the if statement inside that. Now for the grid item, let's double click on it, and each grid item is going to have parentheses. So let's just put dot, and here we have three options. The one that is most useful that I found is adaptive, because it's going to allow you to adapt easily to each resolution, but you also have fixed and flexible. We're going to select adaptive. Typically, you only need to set the minimum, but if you want to be very specific, you can definitely set the maximum as well. For the minimum, I want to make sure that my card will always have at least 300 of width. So adaptive is going to try to fit automatically with the given space that we have overall using that minimum size. And by the way, lazy here means that when you scroll hundreds or thousands of these items, then it's going to do that in a performant way instead of loading everything at once. You also have lazy H-stack and V-stack if you want to use that just for the lazy feature. But lazy V-grid use columns and lazy H-grid would use rows instead. And the number here is going to apply to the columns or rows. Next, if you look at the items, you're going to notice that we have set a padding. And typically when you're using components inside a grid, you don't want to set the padding inside the component. Rather, you want to set that from the stack or the grid. So to fix that, we're going to go to the course item, and at the very bottom, you're going to find padding 20. You can just delete that, and we can just head back to home view. Then after you resume, it's going to look like this. So now we're going to control the spacing between items for columns and rows, as well as the entire container. Let's start with the easiest one, which is the lazy grid. We can just add the padding, and it's going to be horizontal 20. For the rows, we're going to go to the lazy V-grid, and at the very end, we can add a comma, spacing, and then set it to 20. Now for the spacing between the columns, we're going to go to the grid item inside the parentheses, And before the end of the grid item parentheses, you can see by the yellow highlight, you can go there, add comma, and then spacing 20. The cool thing about the setup that we have so far using Mesh Geometry, you can see that even though we're using a different layout using VGrid, the animation still works perfectly and it knows the position of each card, so the transition back and forth is really smooth. Now we need to fix a few things, such as we need to add some padding. We also need to have a max width for the image. So let's do that. Let's go to course view and we're going to find the course image. To make things easier, you can always do Command F to search for a keyword such as course.image. And then you can dismiss that by clicking done or escape. Let's add right after the aspect ratio a padding of 20. And then we also want to add a max width using the frame. So max width, it's going to be 500 so that the image here doesn't get too big if we have a really big screen. We're going to add the same padding for the course item. So let's go to course item. Let's search for the course image, which is right here. After aspect ratio, add the padding, and this follows the design. Next, we're going to go to the home view and we're going to fix the featured item here, which is taking a little bit too much space. But since we're using the tab view, we can't really adapt this fully for the iPad unless we change the layout, which is going to take a lot of time. So for now, we're just going to make this a little bit smaller. Let's go to the featured section. So I'm going to click the breadcrumb to the featured, and here we're going to find the featured item. We're going to add a frame using a max width of 500. This is going to be aligned to the left. So what we can do is to add another frame just for the sake of alignment, max width dot infinity. So this is going to take the whole space and set the default alignment to center. So you can see here that it works nicely with a max width for the card. Next, we're going to go to the tab bar and we're going to take care of the rounded corners depending on the screen. Sometimes we have smaller rounded corners such as the iPad, but also we can switch to the iPhone SE. For these devices, they don't have a home indicator, and also we don't need the corner radius. But in order to fix that, we need to detect the actual size of the home indicator. So what we're going to use is the geometry reader. So let's command click on the H stack, embed that inside a geometry reader, and we're going to set proxy in. Next, we're going to declare a boolean let has home indicator is equal to proxy dot save area insets. So using this value, we can determine the size of the bottom or the top of the saved area insets, which means the notch or the home indicator. For the home indicator, it's going to be dot bottom, and if it's 20. So this boolean is going to be true if it's above 20. Now to give you some numbers, the iPad still has a bottom safe area because of the smaller corner radius. But for the iPhone SE, it's 0. And for the new iPhones that have the home indicator as well as the notch, it's going to be 34. So we need to make sure that we're targeting the iPhone SE as well as the iPad for the home indicator. So using this boolean, we can apply that to the frame height of the tab bar. We can set has home indicator question mark, set it to 88 if yes, otherwise set it to 62. Then for the corner radius here, we can also set has home indicator question mark 34, otherwise 0. And let's do the same for the stroke style. So has home indicator question mark 34, otherwise 0. And voila, it works great for the iPhone SE now, and it's also working great for the iPad mini. Next, we're going to take care of the course view corner radius for the cover right here. And so for the cover, I'm going to scroll down a little bit to find the mask for the rounded rectangle that is using a corner radius of 30. So what I'm going to do is to set it so that when this card is loading after appear, so appear square brackets index 0 question mark, I'm going to set it to 0, otherwise 30. And the reason why I'm doing that is because after everything is animated and loaded, then it's going to show without rounded corners, but during the animation of the custom transition of the cards, it's still going to have the rounded corners. So if you test everything using slow animation, you can see that we have a nice animated rounded corners at the very end, and it fits nicely with the corner radius of the iPad itself. Let me switch back, and now we have a really nice layout. We've learned so much in the part 2 of this swiftUI course. I hope you enjoyed all the techniques, and we're going to learn so much more in part 3. So I'll see you in the next course. This is the part 3 of my swiftUI for iOS 15 course, and we're going to cover a lot of things. First, there's the new searchable, where we're going to build a custom UI in which we can search a term and get auto suggestions, as well as being able to select the view and go to that view using a modal sheet. Then we're going to learn how to create a custom modal system in which we have a custom button style with control size, and also we're going to animate these fields so that the circle is going to transition based on the position. We'll cover the new Markdown support in iOS 15 so that we can create rich text styles and open links easily in Safari. The modal is going to have gestures in which you can drag in both directions, and it's going to rotate as well as have a 3D perspective, and you're going to be able to dismiss the modal. Now the modal system is going to switch between screens, and when you're signed in, it's going to remember and it's going to go to the account screen. In the account screen, we're going to learn about the async await feature in which we can run functions asynchronously. This is great for API calls so that you don't want to freeze your app while you're waiting for a response. And also we're going to use the new refreshable so that we have a built-in pull to refresh, and you can see that the data here has changed. Now we're going to add a little feature called the light mode, which allows us to focus on performance, which means that we can enable or disable drop shadows and some heavy graphics. At the same time, we're going to test the performance, look at the CPU usage, the memory, the disk, as well as the network calls. Finally, we're going to cover the accessibility so that we can make sure that voiceover is going to work, and what are some of the best practices for text as well as images and other elements. So at the end of part 3, we're going to build the rest of the screens, even though some of it I'm going to test your knowledge to make sure you're building on your own instead of always following me, and then we can compare the final code together. But most importantly, we're going to wrap things up, and we're going to make sure that we have exactly the same app at the end of this course. So I hope you're excited. We have a lot of materials to cover, and I'm going to do my best to explain all the steps in between. Let's get started. Let's start by creating a new view for the search. So we're going to go to Views and New File. It's going to be called Search View. Next, we're going to embed this inside a navigation view. So let's embed first navigation view. So this is necessary to make the new searchable work. Now for the content, we're going to embed this inside a list. For now, we're going to have 5 results. Then let's add a navigation title on the list. So navigation title, and it's going to be search. So there's a new searchable modifier for creating a search experience, and we're going to put that on the list. So searchable, and the text is going to use a binding. For this value, we're going to create at state var text is equal to empty text by default. And then we're going to bind that using $text. With this done, if you click play, you're going to be able to see the search field, but only when you scroll up. Please note that in my preview version, I'm not able to enter anything in the search field. You will be able to do that in the simulator, and maybe this is going to be fixed in a future version of Xcode. But for now, this is what we have. Next, let's talk about customizations. So by default, you're going to see that it's not going to show the search field, but you can set the display mode by setting right after the text placement dot navigation drawer parentheses and then display mode dot, and now we have the option to set to always. When you do that, you're going to see the search field, but when we scroll down, it's going to transition to the large title back and forth. If you don't like to see that, you can always set navigation bar title display mode to inline, which means that it's not going to transition back to the large title. Another thing that you can customize is the placeholder text here, and we're going to put that right after placement. Prompt text parentheses. A good practice for this is what Apple likes to use, which is to suggest terms using comma. So swiftUI, React, UI design. All right, it would be a good idea to test this in the simulator. And in order to do that, we're going to go to the navigation bar and we're going to use a sheet modal presentation. So for that, we're going to set a state var show search is equal to false by default. Then we're going to scroll down a little bit to find the magnifying glass. And here we're going to embed the image inside a button. So button. The first parentheses are for the action, and we're going to set the label, which is the image itself. For the action, set show search is equal to true. And then we're going to set .sheet modifier to call the modal presentation. So we're going to select is presented. The binding is $show search. We're not going to need undismiss. And for the content, just press enter. And now we're going to show the search view that we just created, parentheses. Let's run this. From the home screen, when we tap on search, it's going to open the search view that we're creating. I can type in the field, but it's not really doing anything. Back in Xcode, let's head back to search view. Let's restructure the list a little bit so that we have more control. So lists is only going to use parentheses. And for the loop, we're going to select the text, select repeat. The for each is going to use the course's data. And for the item data that we receive, let's set item.title. Now the goal here is to be able to filter the search results based on the term that we're typing here. So what you can do is to set for the course's data .filter parentheses, then inside $0. Now this is the equivalent of the first value that we received. So instead of setting item in, we would set $, and we don't need anything else. So it makes it a lot shorter. From that value, set .title .contains parentheses text. What this means is that we're going to filter the courses based on each value title that contains the text, which is the state from searchable. And just with that, you can see that we have 0 results by default. That's because we haven't entered anything. But let's say we enter swiftUI, you can see that it filters to Swift. If you don't like to have empty results when you enter nothing, we can set after the parentheses pipe symbol, which looks like a long vertical line. We're going to do that twice. And this essentially means or text double equal signs, empty double quotes. So again, this means that either we filter based on the search term or nothing, and then it's going to show the results. So that's how you set a super simple search experience with filter. Now, before we get into the search suggestions, I want to add a close button so that I can dismiss this sheet modal presentation. So let's set at environment, parentheses, / dot presentation mode, var presentation mode. Using this environment variable, we're going to be able to dismiss the modal. For the button itself, since we're using a navigation bar, we can add .navigation bar items. And here we have the option for leading, trailing, or one of them. So we're going to use trailing. Then we're going to set button, curly braces, label, and then curly braces again. For the label is simply going to be a text, quotes, done. Let's make that bold. And for the action, we're going to use the environment variable, which is presentation mode dot wrap value dot dismiss parentheses. Thanks to this, when you go to the search view, you see that I can scroll and we have a button inside the navigation bar. And when I click on it, it's going to dismiss the modal. Next, while we're here, we might as well go back to navigation bar and take care of the second button, which is the account button. So we're going to wrap this inside a button first, set the action, and then the label. For the action, let's set show account is equal to true. Show account is not set yet, so let's go to the top and set a state var show account is equal to false. Then let's not forget to set the sheet for the account. Right after the button, .sheet is presented $show account. Again, we don't need the dismiss. And the content, press enter, account view, parentheses. Let's go to account view and do exactly the same thing as the search view. Set at environment, parentheses, / presentation mode var presentation mode. On the list, we're also going to set navigation bar items, trailing, doing exactly the same thing for the button, label, text, done, set it to bold, and for the action, presentation mode dot wrap value dot dismiss parentheses. So that's it. We have the search view and we can filter the results, and we can also dismiss the search view. Then the account button is now connected to the account view, and we can also dismiss that view. So in the next session in the search view, I want to show you how to set suggestions while you type. And this is a really useful and common search feature like what you have in the App Store search, and it's really easy to do in iOS 15. So I'll see you in the next session. Welcome back to session 42, and today we're going to learn about search suggestions. In iOS 15, when we focus on the search field, we can have suggestions and search completion, and those are additional options to the searchable modifier. To create search suggestions, all we need to do is to add the curly braces. Then, just like the results, we'll create a for each loop using, let's say, the courses as an example, receiving the suggestion in. Let's put a text with the suggestion .title. What this is going to do is when we focus on the field, you can see the suggestions. Obviously, the data should not be the same as the results, because these are search terms versus the results are actually supposed to go to the content itself. Let's go ahead and create the data model for the suggestion. So we're going to open model, right click, new file, swiftUI view, suggestion. Let's remove the lines for the UI, then type struct suggestion of type identifiable. Let ID is equal to UUID parentheses. Then we have the text, so var text of type string. Let's create some sample data. Var suggestions is equal to array using square brackets. And we're going to use the data model suggestion text swiftUI, and then we're going to separate the data using comma, and we can copy and paste for the rest. React, and then design. Let's remove the last comma, and then we're going to head back to search view. Now we can replace courses by suggestions. Since the data model is not using a title, but instead it's a text, we're going to have to change that. As a result, when we focus on the text field, we can select one of these results, but when we tap on it, you can see that it's not doing anything. What we want to do is for that action to update the search field. So there's a need modifier for that, and we can apply that to each text dot search completion, put the same suggestion dot text. What you will notice is that when we select the search term, it's going to update the text field, but it's going to keep opening the suggestions. This can be intended, but if you want to show the results instead, you can embed the text inside a button. And then we're going to put an action, and the text is going to be our label. For the action, we're going to update the text state to suggestion.text. With this, when we select the suggestion, it updates and it shows the results right away. Next, we're going to take care of the styling. So we're going to go to the results. Let's make the title bold. And then we're going to embed in a VStack and add a second text. This time it's going to be item.text. The font is going to be footnote, and we'll set the foreground color to secondary. Now for the VStack, we're going to set the alignment to leading, and the spacing is going to be 4. Let's also add an image to the left side. Embed in HTag, add an image using item.image. Let's make this resizable. The aspect ratio is going to be .fill, the frame width of 44, height of 44. Add a background using the color from the assets called background. And finally, we're going to mask the whole thing using a circle shape. Let's align the image to the top. So for the H tag, set alignment to top, and we're going to add a little bit of spacing using 12. Likewise, for the whole container, we can add a little bit of spacing as well. So for the H tag, we're going to set a padding of 4, and it's only going to be for the vertical. Since the divider is not exactly aligned to the text, it can be a good idea to hide it by using list row separator, set to hidden. Awesome. Let's keep the code clean by creating a code section for the content. So let's select the whole for each loop, and we're going to name this content. And right after body, let's create var content of type SumView, curly braces, and then paste the for each. Next, we're going to create a custom style for the list. So let's go back up. And here for the content, now instead of using a list, we're going to use a scroll view. This is going to give us more control over the styling by using a VStack. So command click on the content, embed in a VStack. The VStack is going to have a padding of 20. Let's add a background using ultra thin material. Add a corner radius, so in rounded rectangle using corner radius and style, it's going to be 30, continuous. We're also going to use the stroke style that we created with a corner radius of 30. Then let's add a padding of 20 outside of the container. Then add a background blob. So I'm going to use the image blob 1 using an offset x minus 100, y minus 200. So for the container, thanks to the background, we have a very nice effect using the material. And then we should be adding an extra background to the top because this is really hard to read except when you scroll up. So we're going to add another background before the blob, and this time is going to use a rectangle with a fill using regular material, the frame with a height of 200. Let's align it to the top by setting a new frame using a max height infinity and set alignment to top. We can blur this by using the blur with a radius of 20. And we just need to move it by using the offset y to minus 200. So now, just like the navigation bar with a blur material, we're doing the same to the search field at the very top. So the content is readable, and when we scroll, it just switched to the navigation bar. Now the content is not aligned correctly, so we're gonna go to the content. We just need to make sure that whatever needs to take the full space should have a spacer or a frame with a max width. In this case, we have the multi-line text, and we're going to set a frame using max width dot infinity, and we're going to align that to leading. When you have multiple lines of text, it's also a good idea to set the multi-line text alignment to leading as well. So that's it. We have a super nice experience using mostly just the search bar for the experience itself. Now for the styling is what's taking a lot more code. And we've learned how to add suggestions using a suggestion data model with a search completion that filters the results. In the next session, we're going to open a modal sheet for each of these results. Since this is for the loop, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So we're going to learn how to navigate around that. I'll see you in the next session. Hi and welcome back. This is session 43, and today we're going to cover how to call a modal sheet presentation from a loop. Now the view that we're going to call is the course view, and we have to look at the required fields such as the namespace, which is used for the geometry effect, and then the course for the data, as well as the binding for the show. So course will be from the loop, but the namespace and show will have to be passed. Let's go back to search view. And right after the state text, we're going to create another one for show. So var show is equal to false by default. And also we're going to set a namespace, var namespace. This is pretty much a dummy one just to satisfy the requirement for the course view. Now we're going to jump to the content, and the H tag is going to be embedded inside a button. We're going to have action with the label for the H tag. The action is going to set show to true in order to present the modal, but also to synchronize with the show state inside course view. Now typically you're going to put .sheet after the button or near it, so .sheet is presented, and set the binding to show with $. We're now going to need dismiss, and the content, press enter. Then we can reference the course view with the required fields. So let's select namespace and show. So namespace, show is going to be $show. And in between, we're going to pass the data from the loop. So it's the item that we're receiving, and then comma. Now we're going to test this and tap on each item, but the problem is we're not showing the right data. And that's because we have the sheet that is inside a loop. So from the logic here, it seems that the item that we're passing is not done properly. We can try the courses array from the data. We can set the index to 1, and here you see that it is working properly. So what we want to do is to put the sheet modifier outside of the loop and store the selected index as a state and update it when we press on the button. So let's cut the sheet and go at the very top and put the sheet on the scroll view after navigation bar items. Now we need to set the selected index. So we're going to set a state right after a namespace. So state var selected index is equal to 0. Now we're going to go to the content, and we're going to find the loop. And here we need to somehow get the index from that loop. In order to get the index, we need to edit the loop code. And it's getting a little bit heavy because of the filter. So one way to tackle this problem is to do exactly what the filter does by using an if statement. So it's going to be a lot cleaner. Let's embed the button, and we're going to use an if statement. Type item.title.contains parentheses text, then double pipe text double equal sign to empty quotes. This if statement is going to do exactly the same job as the filter. So now we can just remove it from the loop. Now, in order to get the item and the index, we're going to set the courses array dot enumerated, and all of this selected parentheses inside an array. Then at the end, we need to set a comma, id, colon, backward slash dot offset. Thanks to this, we can set index, comma, item. Now for the button action, we can update the selected index to the index value that we receive for each item. And finally, with the stored selected index, we can go back to the dot sheet and update the data that we're passing using the array with the selected index. As a result, when I tap on any of these items, it's going to show me the correct data. You might need to press space instead of dismissing, otherwise it's going to crash your preview. Next, if you want to fix the title color, we're going to go to the title here and we're going to set foreground color dot primary. Also, we can add a custom divider between the items, and this is where the index is going to come in handy. So right before the button, I'm going to set divider parentheses, and now we have these lines, but the thing is, it's adding to every single line. So what we need to do is to remove the first one. And thanks to the index, we're going to be able to do that. So if index is not equal to 0, then curly braces wrapping around the divider. As a result, we only have the lines after the first row. All right, let's put what we've learned into practice on the featured items inside the home view. So right now, I'm not able to tap each of the featured item to go to the course view. So let's fix that. First, we already have the namespace, and we just need the missing two states. The first state, var show course is equal to false. And the second state, var selected index is equal to 0. Then we're going to jump to featured. Now we're going to try to get the index and the course at the same time. So the array that we have here, we're going to make it enumerated. Then we're going to put all of this inside parentheses and turn that into an array. Then we're going to add at the end the ID, backward slash offset. Before course, we're going to get the index value, comma, course. So instead of wrapping the featured item inside a button, we're going to use untap gesture, and we're going to update the show course to true, as well as the selected index to the index value. Now we just need to add the sheet presentation. So at the end, after background, sheet is presented. The Boolean is show course using a $sign. Dismiss, we can remove it. And the content, we're going to reference course view using namespace and show. So namespace, we already had declared that. Show is show course. And in between, we're going to pass the course, which is going to be from featured courses using the selected index. Let's not forget the comma. Great. Now, if I select any of these cards, it's going to give me the right data. You might have noticed that we have a little bit of blur here, so we're going to fix that by using the coordinate space because we have a problem with the scroll detection. So let's go to the course view. If we scroll down a little bit, we're going to find the geometry reader. And here we have the proxy frame using the global. But the thing is, when you're in a modal sheet, there's a bit of a space at the very top. And using global is not accurate because of that, which means that we're going to need to use name specifically to the scroll view. So name is going to be scroll, and then we're going to set the coordinate space for the scroll view. So coordinate space using name scroll. Now looking at this, you're gonna see that it's not blurred anymore. But we do have one last problem, which is that when we go to the course view, it's going to toggle the tab bar. And so back and forth like this. So the thing is, when we tap on these cards, it's supposed to toggle, show and hide the tab bar. But when we have it here, it's not exactly doing that in our code. And we would have to go to each of these items to do that manually, including for the featured items as well as for the search items. So one way to fix this is to go to the course view, and right after coordinate space, we can set on appear curly braces, and then we can update the model, which is from the environment object, show detail, which tells if this course view is being shown or not, to true. And we can also set on disappear for the model to show detail is equal to false. Awesome. Now let's test it again, and you can see that when I go to the course view multiple times, it's just going to hide and show accurately the tab bar. The same for the search view. Everything is working just fine. So I hope this was useful. In the next session, we're going to start creating a custom modal, and we're going to learn how to manage, how to style, and how to create a login experience. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome back to session 44, and we're going to start a new series in which we're going to focus on creating a custom modal experience with multiple screens such as sign up. We're going to have some gestures. We're going to cover the input styles and the button styles. So there's a lot of stuff. And today we're going to focus on the button style, which is new and even more powerful in iOS 15. So let's get started. So let's start with creating a basic layout for the custom modal. First of all, we're going to create a new view inside the views folder, new file. It's going to be called a sign up view. Now let's start with the text. Let's change that to sign up. We're going to make that a large title, and we're going to make it bold as well. Then embed in VStack and add another text. So going back to Figma, I'm just going to copy this text right here and paste here. I'm going to make this a font headline. For the VStack, I'm going to set it to alignment to leading, and the spacing is going to be 16. Next, let's create the button. So button, we have the action, label, and the text for the button is going to be create an account. Now you can see that the default button is always a text with an accent color. But now you can change the button style by using the button style modifier on the button itself. So if you press dot, you're going to have a bunch of options, including automatic and borderless, which are essentially the same as the default one. If you just want a text without the tint, you can use plain. But then we have two more options that are really interesting, such as bordered, which creates the container itself with the rounded corners, as well as the background color. And if you want to use bordered prominent, then it's going to turn the text into white and switch the background color to use the accent color. Now, if you want to change the color, you can use the tint modifier. So for example, you want to use red or blue, and it's going to change from the accent color. Furthermore, you can also change the size of the button by using control size. And you can set it to small, for example, as well as regular, which is the default, and large, which makes the button a lot more prominent. So this is appropriate for a sign up button, for example. If it's a skip button or a navigation bar, as well as an action bar button, then the regular and small would be more appropriate. We can switch back to using bordered, and the tint is going to be accent color. Then we're going to style the modal to look more like this using the glass blur background as well as the background shape. Let's start with the padding. We're going to set it to 20. Then the background modifier using ultra thin material. We'll create the rounded corners by using in rounded rectangle, parentheses, corner radius 30, and then style continuous. Let's add the stroke style using corner radius of 30 as well. And the shadow is color, parentheses, shadow. Set an opacity of 0.2, radius 30, x 0, y 30. Cool. Now we're going to create the outside padding of 20, and we're going to add a background blob. Image blob 1, and we can move using offset x 200, y minus 100. So right now it's not using the full width, and that's because of the content itself. Sometimes the text, depending on how it's aligned, it's going to take the minimum size possible. So we just need to make sure that one of the elements is going to take the full width, which you can apply on the text. So frame max width infinity. Now let's connect the modal from the navigation bar. So let's go to navigation bar, and we're going to use app storage to make it easier. App storage, parentheses, show modal, var show modal is equal to false by default. Let's scroll down a little bit to find avatar default, and where it says show account, instead of using that, first we're going to comment this and set show modal is equal to true. So when we tap on the avatar button, it's going to change the show modal state. Now let's go to content view. At the top, right next to the first app storage, show modal, var show modal is equal to false. Then right after tab bar, let's set a condition if show modal will include sign up view, parentheses. Now if you play the preview and you tap on the account button, it's going to show the sign up. We just need to set a background color. So let's embed in a Z stack, and then we're going to use color.clear.background, and the background is going to use regular material. Typically the background should ignore the save area. Next, let's create a close button. And for this, I'm going to go to the course view and go to the button code section just to find the close button and copy that. Then going back to content view, I'm just going to paste it, then embed this inside a button with the action as well as label. Let's make sure that the button is going to be at the very top right. We're going to use frame for that. Max width infinity, max height infinity, then align to top trailing. Then add a padding of 20. For the button action, set show modal to false. With this, we'll be able to close the modal and open it again. Now we just need to make sure that we have some animation. So we're going to need to wrap that inside with animation. Now just make sure that we have the Z index on the Z stack to 1, otherwise it's not going to transition out properly. So you're going to see the fade out, but we don't have a fade in because in the navigation bar, we also need to set with animation. Like this. Awesome. Let's go back to content view, and we should have a nice fade in, fade out, but in the preview, you're not going to see the fade in working properly. So we have to switch to the simulator to see that. Now, before we go, we should have a dark mode version of the blob, and it's really easy to do that. We just need to go to the assets catalog, then go to the blob and open the inspector. For the appearances, we're going to set to any dark, then go to blob 1 dark, copy that, go back to blob 1, and for the dark 1x, we're going to paste it. As a result, when you run it again, it now has the dark mode version. And it's really nice because I can easily switch using the keyboard shortcuts Shift, Command, and A to see how it looks like between the two modes. So let me hide the inspector and then go back to sign up view. Now in the next session, I want to show you how to create a custom button style. And we're also going to use the control size, which allows us to adapt to multiple sizes, even though we have a custom button with gradients and borders and blur. So I'll see you in the next session. In this session 45, we're going to cover how to create our own button style from scratch. Also, we're going to make it adapt to the control size so that we can customize from small to large. To create your very own button style, we're going to create a new file in the styles folder. So new file, let's name this Angular button style. Create. We don't need the layout. Then type struct Angular button style of type button style, curly braces. Then type make body and use the auto completion so that we can get the configuration. Using that configuration, we're going to set the label for the button, and now we can apply the styles to it. Starting with the padding, a button typically has more padding horizontally, so we're going to set horizontal to 10 and another one for vertical to 4. For the background, we're going to set a background, and the color, we want to make it adaptive to dark mode. So to do that, we can use a system background color, and we need to write it this way, so color parentheses dot system background. Then we can apply the corner radius to 20. With this, we can already apply the button style by going back to sign up. We haven't created the dot notation yet, but for the button style, we can set Angular button style parentheses. So you can see it's using the same corner radius and the background color. Now, if you want to use the dot notation, we're going to go back and we're going to create an extension to the button style where self double equal signs to Angular button style, curly braces, then static var Angular colon self curly braces, then return dot init parentheses. So with this extension, we're going to be able to use the dot notation by going back to sign up, and instead of having this long name, we can just set dot Angular. Now let's talk about the control size, because right now this is a custom button style, but if I change to small, for example, nothing is going to happen. What we need to do is to go back to Angular button style, and then we're going to use an environment variable at environment parentheses / dot control size var control size. So just like the color scheme, the control size are preset environment objects that we can use to customize the button. Let's start with a variable that's going to take care of the paddings. So var extra padding of type cgfloat, curly braces. And because we have a lot of options, we're going to use a switch instead of multiple if statements. So switch using the value called control size, curly braces. If you wait a little bit, it's going to give you a suggestion to fill all the cases. So click fix. And we have mini, small, regular, large, and default. Now for mini, we're going to respect exactly the official buttons, and mini and small seems to have the same number. We're going to return 0 for both. The regular is going to be 4, large 12, and default 0. Again, the extra padding depends on the control size, and it's going to give us a cgfloat number that we can apply to the padding. For the horizontal padding, let's add the extra padding, and for vertical as well. Thanks to this, I'm going to be able to go to sign up view. Now let's change it to regular, and boom, it also changes the padding. So I can do large, and it's going to update nicely. We can also do the same thing for the corner radius using the control size. So let's go back to Angular button style and add another variable. This time is going to be var corner radius of type cgfloat again, curly braces, switch control size, curly braces, wait a little bit, and then get the suggestions, return the numbers that you want. In my case, it's going to be 12, 12, 16, 20, and default 12. With the corner radius value, I can replace the hard-coded one, corner radius. Let's go back to sign up view. Now you can see that we have a larger corner radius if the button is large, but if it's small, it's a small corner radius. Awesome. Let's put it back to large and go back to angular button style to apply the angular gradient. Now instead of using a background color, let's delete color and replace that by a rounded rectangle shape using corner radius and style, corner radius variable, style continuous, then set the fill. Then here we can use angular gradient. Now let's pick the colors option, and this is going to be an array of colors. Let's set pink, purple, blue, pink. Center dot center, angle dot degrees, starting with -90, and degrees again for an angle to 270. Since we already have the corner radius on the rounded rectangle, we can remove the corner radius and apply the stroke style modifier using corner radius, corner radius. For the rounded rectangle on top of the fill, we can also set a blur radius using the corner radius as the blur value. So testing the design, you can see that it looks a little bit like this with the angular gradient and a blur as well as the stroke style. To make it look like the design, we can add an extra background that is going to have a different gradient. This time it's going to be linear. So let's go back to angular button style, add a background modifier before, again using the rounded rectangle, corner radius and style, corner radius variable dot continuous, then fill using this time a linear gradient, also the colors, an array of colors. Because we want to make it adaptive, we're going to use the same technique, which is using the system background. So color parentheses dot system background, comma, then for the second color, color dot system background as well. This time we're going to use dot opacity to 0.6. We're going to make the gradient go from top as a starting point to bottom as the end point. Finally, just for this rounded rectangle, we're going to add a blend mode of soft light. Now, if you resume, it looks really nice, and we can also check how it looks like in dark mode. So that adapts really nicely. What is cool about the button style is that the rest is customizable, including how you want to manage your text. So I can use the max width infinity, or I can use the padding depending on the control size. Also, I can change the font style to, let's say, headline. Let me just put this back, and I can play with the blend mode right after font. So overlay, and it can create some really interesting effects. So if I switch back to light mode, it can generate really cool colors. You can definitely play with the structure of your background and text to create the effects that you want. In the next session, we're going to cover Markdown, which is a new feature in iOS 15 in order to create rich text and also create links inside a text element. So I'll see you in the next session. Welcome back to video 46, and in this session, we're going to cover Markdown. If you're not familiar with Markdown, this is what we use in a lot of writing apps such as Notion, and it makes it super easy to write titles and bold and links and images by using short symbols instead of more complex tags to create the same result. Now in swiftUI, they only support emphasis. So to create bold, you're going to have 2 asterisks in front and at the end, or double underscore. For italic, it's going to be a single as well as a single underscore. Another thing that is really useful are the links, which is written with square brackets for the name and for the link itself inside parentheses. In swiftUI, this is going to open in Safari. So if you look at the text here, sometimes you want to make keywords bold and other keywords such as terms and privacy policy to link to those respective URLs. Going back to Xcode, let's add another text after button, text, parentheses, quotes. What is cool is that the text automatically supports Markdown, so you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to install any library. Let's put the text by clicking on create an account. Now for the text right here, we can make it italic by using a single underscore or bold by using double underscores. And then we can continue. You agree to our terms of service. And here we're going to use double asterisk at the end as well. So whether you use underscore or asterisk is the same, but if you use it once, then it's going to make it italic. Now let's take a look at links. So we're going to continue the text and privacy policy. Here we're going to select and wrap that inside square brackets with parentheses in the front, which is where we're going to put the link. So http designcode.io. Now you can see that the text color becomes the accent color. We won't be able to test in the preview, so we're going to have to run the app. When you tap on the link, it's going to open in Safari. Awesome. Now we can also make this bold by using asterisk, and we can customize the text as usual. So the font is going to be footnote, and using the foreground color to secondary, it's going to color the entire text. If you want to change the link color, you can set accent color to secondary. Let's take a look at the bottom text, which has a button for sign in. Since Markdown is going to open a URL, we don't want to use that for the sign in button because it's an action inside the app. So here we're going to use an H tag instead, starting with the text already have an account, question mark, embed that in an H tag. Then we're going to set a button with an action, label text, sign in, then make it bold. Later on, we're going to use the action to switch between sign in and sign up screens. Now there's a third way to combine text, and it's going to allow for more styling. So we're going to divide this text by 3. Let me cut from creating an account to the end. And here I can just put plus text, quotes, and then put that content. Unfortunately, when you do that, some of the modifiers won't work. So let me just comment this for now and separate the text another time. So from the comma, and here add another text, quote, and paste. Now you can see that the text elements are wrapping nicely, and we are even using Markdown. What's cool about this is that you can individually style each of these text components. For example, for the second text, I'm going to set foreground color to .primary, .opacity to 0.7. Now the create an account text has an opacity of 0.7. Next, we want to be able to use these styles for all the text, including the H tag as well. So what we can do is to cut this, and we're going to group the entire thing. Let's command click on the text and group it. Then we can paste back the modifiers, and we can uncomment the accent color. We can also bring the H tag inside the group. So unlike the VStack, grouping doesn't hold any properties such as the spacing and alignment related to the VStack, but you can still apply modifiers to inner elements of the group. Lastly, we can add a divider, parentheses. And voila, that's how you work with text using Markdown or an H tag if you use an action. Otherwise, you can combine multiple text elements and customize each of them with text-related properties. And finally, we're grouping the whole thing so that we can apply all of these styles to every single inner element. In the next session, we're going to cover the text fields and how to create custom input styles. So I'll see you in the next session. Hello, and welcome back to session 47, where we're going to cover about custom input styles. So we'll start with the basic email and password, text fields, and secure fields. So let's start by creating the state. So state var email is equal to empty, and then state var password is equal to empty. Next, let's create a text field before the button. So text field, parentheses, we can select title, string protocol, and text binding. The title is email, and the binding is $email. This is going to create the basic text field without any style. Now you can't type anything in the preview, but you can do so in the simulator. Let's start styling it. We're gonna pause the preview let's add a padding of 15 all around. And for the icon on the left, we're going to set padding dot leading 40. So this gives us enough space for the icon. Let's add a blur material, background dot thin material in rounded rectangle, corner radius 20, and style continuous. Then the stroke style to a corner radius of the same 20. For the icon, we're going to set an overlay using an image system name. It's going to be male. Let's set the indentation because we have some styles to add, starting with the foreground style to secondary. Then the frame is going to be width 36 and height 36 as well, with the background dot thin material in rounded rectangle, corner radius 14, continuous. Now we'll move this to the left side. So to do so, we're going to set a frame using a max width infinity, then alignment leading. Let's add a little bit of padding, so padding of 8. Great. With this, we can start creating a custom modifier so that we can reuse it for both the text field and the password field. And also, if we have more screens using those fields, then we don't have to repeat the code over and over. I'm going to cut the entire thing, including the padding, to the overlay, then open the styles folder and create a new file. We're going to call it input style. Let's remove the layout code. Then struct input style of type view modifier, curly braces, then func body, enter, content, and paste all the modifiers. There's just one thing that we're going to make customizable, and that is the icon. So var icon of type string, then replace the hard-coded icon to icon. Let's not forget to make it usable with dot notation. So at the end, we're going to type extension, view, curly braces, func input style, which is the custom name for the dot notation. And this is a function that is going to receive icon of type string. Then we'll have a default value so that we don't need to enter it if we choose to. So male, then return some view, curly braces. Now we can use the modifier by calling input style with capital I, parentheses, then we're going to pass the icon value. So now that we have our custom view modifier, we can go back to the sign up view and apply that to the text field. So dot input style with lowercase I, and then set the icon to male. And likewise, we can use it for secure field, parentheses, string and text binding, password, and $sign password. And for the secure field, we're also going to use input style, icon, lock. If you go to the simulator, the email, you can enter text, and for the password, it's hidden because this is a secure field. Now you can enable the keyboard by pressing Command K. But notice that the keyboard is standard, and sometimes you want to make it so that it's specific to an email or a password. So let's do that. For the text field, typically you want to use .text content type to email address. Likewise, you want to set the keyboard type to email address. Now, typically an email will always be lowercase, so we can turn off auto capitalization and set it to none. And finally, we definitely want to disable auto correction as well. Set it to true. Now for the password, we just want to customize the text content type and set it to password. And that's it. You can see that the keyboard has the commercial A, which is great for email. And also when you type, it's not going to try to autocorrect or capitalize the text. So that's how you create a text field and a secure field with a custom style. In the next session, we're going to use focus states so that we can animate when it's focused on each of those fields. So I'll see you in the next session. Hey, and welcome back to session 48. Today we're going to cover focus states, which is going to let us select each field and apply an effect and also an animation when we switch between them. The first step is to set an enum where we'll list the different possibilities. So enum field of type hashable, curly braces. The first case is email, and the second case is password. Using this enum, we're going to be able to use at focus state var focused field of type field. We'll need to make this optional using question mark because this can be empty. Now to use the focus state, we'll apply it to the field, so the text field and the secure field. Let's use the modifier dot focused, and here we're going to select the one that says equals. The value is going to be the binding to the focus state, which is focus field. And when this text field is focused, we'll change the value to dot email. Likewise for the secure field, dot focused binding focus field equals password. It is important to know that in my version of Xcode, when I start using focus state, the preview is going to stop working, giving me an error. A simple fix for that is to go to the preview code and embed the view inside a Z-stack. This should effectively remove the issue. Next, we're going to use the focus state to apply some effects and animation. Let's move to the text field and let's add a shadow. So dot shadow. The color is going to use focus field and set the condition so double equal sign to dot email question mark. If that's the case, set the color to primary and set an opacity to 0.3. Otherwise, set the color to dot clear. Then the radius is 10, x0, and y3. Now we can play this, and when we select the text field, you see that we have the drop shadow. And when it's not focused, then it removes the drop shadow. Let's copy and paste the same modifier, shadow, and apply that to the secure field. Let's change the value from email to password. Next, let's create the circle animation that is going to be behind the container so that we have this beautiful blurred color. Let's go to the VStack, and at the end of the VStack, after background material, let's add a background modifier. Then inside it, we're going to set a circle parentheses. You can already see the black circle in the back. Now we're going to make it fill using dot blue. Then we'll set the frame to width 68 and height 68. Next, we'll set another frame using max width infinity and max height infinity. This allows us to align to top leading. Then using offset, we'll set the Y to 200. For now, we're going to use a hard-coded value, but later on, we're going to learn how to detect the position using Geometry Reader. So at this point, you can test approximately the position for each field. So 120 and 190. Set the same condition, focus field, double equal signs to dot email, question mark 120, otherwise 190. Now you can see that the default is set to password, and perhaps we can switch between the values. Instead of email, we're going to set to password 190, otherwise 120. As a result, by default, it's going to be focused on the email field. Let's play this and see if it works. So when I tap on password or email, then it moves the circle to the right field. We just need to make this animated, and for that to happen, we need to wrap the state change inside with animation. But first, let's set the state. So after focus state, let's set state var circle y of type CG float is equal to 0 by default. Then going back to the bottom, we're going to use onChange modifier to listen to the changes of focus field. For perform, press enter. We're going to receive a value in. Then we'll set a condition if value double equal sign to dot email curly braces. we'll change the circle Y to 120, or else set the circle Y to 190. Let's not forget to wrap the value change inside with animation. Let's move the code inside it. Now, since we're doing the value change here, we don't need to repeat that, so we can just remove this condition and just set circle Y. Let's see the result. When I focus on email, it animates to the text field. Otherwise, it's going to go to the password field. But for the initial position, we might want to change the state here to set to 120. Awesome. In the next session, we'll learn how to detect the field position automatically by using Geometry Reader. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome back. This is session 49, and today we're going to take on the challenge of detecting the field position so that we can use it for the circle and animate between these fields. Now, you might have guessed it, we're going to use Geometry Reader. And since we're going to use it twice for both fields, we're going to put it in its own code section right after the body. Let's start with var geometry of type SumView, then geometry reader receiving proxy in, and we're going to put color.clear and store that in a preference key. So we're going to need to set up the preference key in model preference keys. It's basically the same code here, except with a different name. Struct circle preference key of type preference key, curly braces. Then default value for the type is going to be CG float with a default of 0. Then we're going to reduce it and set value is equal to next value parentheses. Let's go back to the sign up view. From color clear, set preference key value. The key is circle preference key dot self, and the value we're gonna take it from the proxy dot frame in. Now for the coordinate space, we want to be specific to this box right here, so we're gonna set it to named container. Then at the end of the second parentheses, set min y. This container right here, we're gonna set the coordinate space. So make sure it's roughly after the two backgrounds. Set coordinate space using the name container. Now we're going to scroll up a little bit to find the text field and the secure field. Then we're going to set the overlay using the geometry code sections that we just created. The same overlay is going to be applied to the secure field. Now for each of these fields, we're going to listen to the preference key change and store the value that we're getting, which is the min y from the geometry reader. So let's set on preference key change with a value and perform. The value again is a circle preference key dot self, and then press enter for perform and receive a value. We're going to store it in a state that we haven't declared yet, but it's going to be called email y is equal to value. And likewise, we're going to do the same for secure field. So on preference change, circle preference key dot self, perform value in, and then the next value name is going to be password y is equal to value. We just need to set these two states that haven't been declared yet. So let's go back up and set state var email y of type CG float is equal to 0, state var password y of type CG float is equal to 0. Thanks to the geometry reader for each of these fields, we managed to get the y position for each and stored them to these states. So now we just need to use them. Remember at the very bottom where we're setting the circle y, well, these numbers are hard-coded. So instead of using them, we're going to set email y, and for the password, it's going to be password y. So when we start a preview and test this, you can see that we have a problem with the initial position as well as the first click. But on the second click, it's switching properly. To fix the initial position, we just need to go back up to the text field, and on preference change, as soon as we're receiving the email y value, we can also update the circle y to value as well. As a result, you can see that the initial position is now corrected. Furthermore, this position now is dynamic, which means that even if you change to more content and you push down, then it's going to keep working perfectly. Before we finish, another thing that we can do is to change the color of the circle as we switch. Let's store a new state. So state var circle color of type color is equal to .blue by default. Now we're going to go to the circle and replace the fill color to circle color. And finally, when we do unchange and update the circle Y, we're also going to update the circle color to .blue for the email and then circle color to .red for the password. In the simulator, you're going to see that it works great. And when we change to the password field, it becomes red and back to blue. So I hope you enjoyed this. In the next session, we're going to start managing our modals so that we can switch between multiple modals such as sign in and sign up and manage the states between them. So I'll see you in the next session. Hello, and welcome back to session 50 of the course. Typically in an app, you're going to have multiple modals such as sign in, sign up, forgot password. Especially since we're creating a custom modal, we need to learn how to manage them in a single place. Normally, we would manage them in content view, but if you have a lot of codes, especially for animations and styles, then you might want to create a new file for it. But first of all, let's deal with the data. We're going to go to model. In the model file, this is the observable object that can be included across the app. And since we don't want to repeat it, we're just going to use a single one and add more states to it. So let's start by listing the different modals that we're going to have by using enum. It's a modal of type string, curly braces, case, sign up for the sign up view, and another case, sign in for the sign in view, but we haven't created yet. Now, just like the tab bar, we're going to set a selected modal. The tab bar is using app storage because it's persistent, but in this case, it's going to use observable object, which is not persistent and can have richer data. So let's set publish var selected modal of type modal, which is the enum, and we're going to set the default to sign in. Next, we're going to create the modal view that is going to manage all the modals. So right click on views, new file, modal view, replace the text by the sign up view, parentheses. Now we're going to put this inside a Z-stack. And then using the data, we're going to include it so that we can use the observable object. At environment object, var model of type model. And I know it's a little bit confusing between modal and model. And the difference is the model is the data and modal is the custom dialog that we're creating. And just for the preview, we need to include that every single time. Dot environment object model. Now with this, we can set the switch. So this is going to take care of all the cases and show the correct modal. Switch the data, which is model dot selected modal, curly braces. Now the first case is going to be sign up, and we're going to include the sign up view, parentheses. Then the second case is sign in, and we're going to include the sign in view. But for now, let's use sign up view, and we're going to replace this after. All right, let's create the sign in view. So right click, swiftUI view, sign in view. The sign in view is almost exactly the same as the sign up view. So we can just copy everything inside the struct. From the enum, get all the content, including geometry. Go back to sign in view and paste all of that. Remember that we have a little issue with the preview. So let's just embed this inside a Z-stack. Now you can see that it's exactly the same as the sign up. We just need to change the content a little bit. So here it's going to be sign in instead. Back to the design, you can see that it's almost exactly the same thing, except it doesn't have the bottom text and the button says sign in. So let's scroll down a little bit, remove the text that says by clicking, change the text on the button to sign in, and the bottom text, it's going to say no account yet. Then instead of sign in, it's going to be sign up. Now this button here is going to be used to switch between the two modals. Before we can do that, we just need to include the environment object. Environment object var model of type model. Then also for the preview dot environment object model parentheses. With this, we're going to go to the button, and for the action, set model selected modal to dot sign up. Let's do the same for the sign up view. Back at the top, environment object var model of type model. Then for the preview, environment object model parentheses. Then set the button action. So model dot selected modal is equal to sign in. Awesome. The action should be working now for both modals. Let's go back to modal view and replace the case sign in to sign in view. Also, let's not forget to remove the first sign up view. Now, if you play the preview and you click on the sign up button, it's going to switch to sign up, and sign in switch back to sign in. But this only works on the modal view, which is not even included in the content view. So let's go to content view, and we're going to move the styling and the structure for the modal. As I mentioned before, this should be managed inside the modal view. So let's cut the content inside the Z stack. And here we already have a Z stack in modal view, so we can replace this by modal view parentheses. Fix the indentation and go back to modal view. Now inside the Z stack, we can paste the code that we just cut. We don't need the sign up, and the button is going to be after the modal because it needs to be on top. So at the end. Now the state that is taking care of showing or not showing the entire modal view is an app storage, and it is missing here. So we're going to set app storage parentheses show modal var show modal is equal to true by default. Great. If you run this in the simulator or from the content view, when you tap on the modal, it's going to go to the sign in, and we can switch back and forth, and we can also close the modal. In the next session, we're going to cover the drag gesture. We'll be able to drag the modal in both directions using rotation and 3D transform, and we're going to manage the styles even more efficiently. So I'll see you in the next session.